The execution thread sky was filled with smoke as the giant Varnic warship hovered over the peaceful colony. Its shadow darkened the ground as frightened alien villagers ran for cover. And in the middle of it all, a single human man named Max was being dragged by armored Varnic soldiers. His clothes were torn, his face bruised, but his eyes calm, like he had already seen the end and accepted it. The Varnic soldiers laughed as they pulled him through the dirt, calling him weak, calling him nothing more than a soft earth creature, not built for war, not built for strength, not built to survive their empire. Max said nothing. He only stared at the burning village around him. The homes he helped build now turned into ruins, the families hiding behind rubble, the children peeking from corners, their eyes wide with Firth. Soldiers took Max to the central plaza of the colony, a large square surrounded by ruined shops, broken towers, and the remains of what once was a peaceful place. The Varnic commander stood on a metal platform waiting with a cruel smile. His voice echoed through speakers as he announced to the crowd, this human dared resist the might of the Varnic. This human dared believe Earth had any power. This human will now show all of you what happens when you challenge the Empire. Max was pushed to his knees in the center of the platform, and above him floated cameras, small and silent, recording everything, broadcasting live to Varnic systems across the galaxy. Entire planets were watching. Alien citizens were watching their screens, cheering for blood, wanting to see what happened when a human tried to stand against the Empire. The Varnic commander stepped forward, raising a long blade glowing with blue plasma. He looked down at Max with eyes full of pride and cruelty. You humans are all the same, soft, weak, emotional. You build your colonies and dream of peace while we take what we want. You are nothing, and this moment will remind your people of their place. Max finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. You should not have done this. The commander laughed, and the crowd laughed with him, but Max was not talking to them. He looked up to the sky, as if waiting for something. Then he moved his hand, slightly touching a small device on his wrist, and in that moment a signal was sent, a pulse of light, too fast to see, too quiet to hear, but powerful enough to reach across the stars. Varnic did not notice. They were too busy celebrating. The cameras zoomed in on Max's face, the calmness in his eyes, the strength behind the silence. The commander lifted the blade high and brought it down, and in one swift motion the screen cut to black across the Varnic Empire. Billions saw the execution. They cheered, believing they had won, believing Earth would now fear them even more. But far away in a hidden bunker beneath Earth's surface, a red light began to flash for the first time into centuries, and in that dark room a woman in a black uniform stood up slowly and stared at the blinking screen, her face pale but her eyes full of focus. She whispered the name Max, and then she turned to the others in the room, her voice cold and strong. Activate Ghostfire protocol. With a word, the entire room began to move. Men and women in black gear ran to their stations. Alarms flashed, lights blinked, maps appeared on screens across the galaxy. Deep ships began to wake, old codes unlocked, weapons no one had touched in lifetimes came back to life. Stealth cruisers hidden in asteroid belts began to rise, engines powering up like sleeping beasts, now fully awake. Max had done it. He had given everything to trigger the signal, and now Earth was coming, not with noise, not with fire, but with purpose and strategy and something colder than war, justice in the colony world. The stage was silent. Rain began to fall, washing away the blood. The Varnic soldiers packed up their gear, laughing, unaware that something far bigger had begun. The children who had watched the execution could not stop thinking about the human they had seen, his face, his silence, his strange peace. They did not understand it, but they felt it deep in their hearts. Something was wrong. Something had changed, and high above the colony, hidden among the stars, a small human probe watched and recorded and sent every detail back to Earth. Every scream, every laugh, every cruel word, and every second of Max's death. Varnic had no idea that the man they killed was not just an engineer. He was the match to a fire that would not stop burning. And back on Earth, deep in the heart of the command base, a map lit up with red targets blinking one after the other as the woman in black looked at the screen and said in a voice filled with steel, "They made a mistake. They think we are weak. They think we are broken. But they have never seen what we become when we lose one of our own." And far beyond the planets, where the Varnic celebrated, something old, something powerful, something purely human had just opened. Its iced signal reaches Earth, deep beneath the surface of Earth, far from the sunlight, and hidden under layers of steel and security. The command center, known only as Black Echo, roared to life, alarms flashing, lights glowing red and on. The main Wallace signal blinked in a slow and steady rhythm. The room was filled with agents and analysts, all dressed in black, their movements sharp and fast, but silent like ghosts among machines. At the center of it all stood Commander Reyna, her face unreadable as she stared at the signal. She whispered one word, "Max," and suddenly the entire room stood still. Then the whisper became a command: launch Ghostfire protocol around the world sleeping. Stations activated, satellite networks adjusted. Drones in deep space changed course. Without human hands touching them, submarines beneath frozen oceans powered up their quiet engines. And in orbit above Mars, a hidden fleet opened its eyes and prepared to strike. For centuries, the Ghostfire protocol had remained a secret, a defense so powerful that even the leaders of allied worlds had only heard rumors of it. It was designed not for attack, not for conquest, but for one single purpose: to respond to an act so cruel that no negotiation, no treaty, no alliance could ignore it: the murder of a peaceful human citizen by an alien empire, without provocation, without mercy, without understanding. And now Max had given his life to activate Titan, a high platform within Black Echo. Commander Reyna spoke to her team with her voice cold and strong, and her eyes burning with something deeper than revenge. "This is not an invasion," she said. "This is not a war for resources or pride. We are not the Varnik. We are not monsters, but what they have done is not something we will let stand. They took one of ours. They laughed at his death. They made children watch. They turned a peaceful colony into an example. We will now show them what that example truly means." As she spoke, images of Max appeared on the screens around her: his quiet face, his calm hands, the moment he sent the signal, and the second before his death. Across the room, no one looked away, not even the hardened veterans who had seen 100 battles, because Max was one of them, and more than that, he was the one who believed that peace could work, the one who volunteered for the Last Measure project, the one who knew he might have to die so others would finally see the truth of the Varnik Empire. His death had not been an accident. It had been a final act of bravery, and now the ghosts were rising in deep space. Human ships, cloaked in dark energy, began moving silently toward the outer Varnik systems. These were not battleships filled with fire and missiles. These were Ghostfire vessels armed with silence, with intelligence, with precision, designed to infiltrate, not destroy, to reveal, not conquer. And inside them were operatives trained not just in war, but in language, culture, empathy, and code, because Earth had learned long ago that winning was not about how many you kill. It was about how many you free. Meanwhile, on Varnik-controlled worlds, strange things began to happen. A military communication hub suddenly failed. A government data center was emptied of all files. Without any trace, propaganda screens started showing hidden footage of Max's execution, played in slow motion from different angles, showing the fear in the crowd, the horror in the children's eyes, the smug cruelty on the commander's face. Someone had hacked their systems. Someone had entered without permission, without sound, without being seen, and left behind only questions. Varnik leaders were furious. They called it human tricks. They called Earth cowards hiding behind illusions. But the people began to whisper in markets and factories and homes. Is it true? Is Earth really this strong? Is Earth really this smart? Is it true they only strike when you kill one of their son? A small school on a Varnik mining colony, a child asked his teacher, "Why did the human smile before he died?" And the teacher had no answer. Only silence. Back on Earth, Reyna walked into a chamber where an old man sat alone, watching the stars on a holographic wall. He turned as she entered and smiled. "You launched it, didn't you?" He said. She answered, "Max did it. We move now." The old man stood slowly and placed his hand on the wall, tracing the stars with quiet fingers. He was the founder of the Ghostfire protocol, the one who designed the idea of Last Measure, the belief that even in death a human could teach the galaxy a lesson worth remembering. He turned to Reyna and said, "Then make sure we finish it, not just with force, but with truth. They must understand not only what we are, but who we are." Reyna nodded and left the room without another word, because there was no time for words now. The countdown had begun, and the shadows of Earth were already reaching across the star sand. Far beyond all of them, the signal continued to pulse through the darkness, a silent, steady heartbeat of a planet that would not be ignored. The Ghostfire protocol moves in the cold silence of deep space. 5 black ships drifted like shadows. Without flame, without sound, without any visible engine, they moved not through force, but through hidden waves of energy known only to the engineers of Earth. Inside those ships were men and women dressed in gray armor, with no ranks, no symbols, only a single glowing line down the spine of their suits. They were the Ghostfire agents, trained since birth in silence, obedience, strategy, and empathy. Not just warriors, but also scholars, spies, diplomats, and hackers. Their mission was not destruction. Their mission was transformation, and it had just begun. The lead vessel, called Silent Step, hovered behind the dark moon of a Varnik industrial planet, its sensors scanning millions of transmissions each second, its AI decoding every message, mapping every weakness, tracking every secret in silence. Then, without a single alarm, without a trace of light, a single agent exited the ship, moving like a shadow across vacuum reaching the surface of the planet in less than a minute. She entered the communication grid through a vent no wider than her shoulders within the hour. The entire planetary defense system had been rewritten by her invisible fingers. The missiles now pointed at their own capital. The alarms were programmed to ignore human signals. The entire infrastructure now a tool of Earth. And no one had even noticed that in another world Ghostfire agents dropped into a city during the night, blending in with the streets, the markets, the slums. They did not shoot, they did not burn. They listened, they spoke, they offered truth in whispers, not commands. They shared the real footage of Max's death to those who dared to see it. They handed small devices to children that played messages of peace, of warning, of pain. They printed old poems from Earth translated into Varnic language speaking of loss and justice and memory. Within days those poems were being repeated in the alleys by those who once believed humans were weak. Now they began to wonder what kind of power makes a man smile before death. What kind of power responds not with rage, but with purpose. In the capital of a Varnic-allied world, a senator found his speech interrupted by a message flashing on every screen in the chamber. It was not a threat, it was not a demand. It was a question. Do you know who Max was? Then a video played of Max helping a Varnic child repair a water purifier on the colony a month before his death. The same child who had watched his execution from behind a wall, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. The video ended with her voice saying, "I do not understand why he had to die." And the chamber fell into silence. Back on Earth, Commander Reyna watched the reports flow in. She saw the data not as numbers, but as growing cracks in the Empire. The Varnic were powerful, yes, but their strength came from control, from fear, from silence. And now the silence was broken. Now there were voices. Now there were questions, and Earth did not need to fire a single shot to make the galaxy listen. Meanwhile, the Varnic High Council met in rage, demanding explanations, demanding war. The Emperor slammed his fist on the table, calling humans cowards, calling them ghosts. But the truth was beginning to poison their confidence. In secret, they knew their systems had been touched, their bases scanned, their soldiers watched. And yet they could find no enemy, no army, no fleet, just silence, just truth. And truth was far more dangerous than weapons. In a remote Varnic prison world, a guard named Keller found a note slipped under his food tray. It had no signature, no threat, only a story, the story of Max, the human who could have escaped but chose not. To the man who believed even his death could change something in the galaxy. Keller read the story 3 times, then looked around his prison walls and began to cry. And in the darkness of the mining moons where workers lived in chains, someone hacked into the security feed and played a single image over and over. Max standing in the crowd before his death, not afraid, not angry, only calm. The miners stared and whispered, "Who is he? And what did they do to him? And why is Earth not afraid to show his face again and again?" Ghostfire agents were not there to rule. They were not there to conquer. They were there to break the chains of lies and let truth do the rest. In a field hospital on a border world, a nurse found her console open with new files. Someone had given her data on Varnic experiments done on alien children, hidden crimes buried under war logs. She stared at the images, and for the first time in years she thought about defecting. She thought about Earth, and above it all, high in the black sky, the silent step continued its watch. Its agents moved, its whispers spread, its mission unfolded. And far away where the stars are oldest, where Earth first placed its last defenses, a new signal began to blink, not of war, not of power, but of remembrance. A whisper that moved faster than any weapon, a ghost not of fire, but of justice. First Varnic defeat. Varnic military base on the volcanic world of Draxus Prime was known for its brutality. Its walls were 10 meters high, covered in plasma turrets and sensors that could detect a breath through stone. Inside the base were thousands of Varnic soldiers hardened and trained for war. Their leader, General Kale, believed no force in the galaxy could touch them, and why should he doubt it? No one had ever breached the base, no one had ever dared come close, until the day the lights flickered. It began with a soft hum in the power core, a glitch in the cameras, a delay in the turrets. No one noticed at first because nothing exploded, nothing burned, there was no enemy in sight. And the soldiers simply kept marching, doing drills, running checks, laughing about humans, still thinking of them as soft and slow and foolish. But beneath the base, deep in the tunnels, Ghostfire agents moved, like wind, wearing armor that bent the light, crawling through shafts and wires, planting nodes, whispering to each other in code that only they understood. Above them, the command center continued to operate, blind to what stirred below them. At exactly 0500 hours, the entire base shut down for 12 seconds, just 12. But when power returned, everything had changed. All turrets now responded only to Varnic signals. All drones had been switched to sleep mode. All communication lines were rerouted to an external channel that played one single phrase again and again. "Do you know what you have done?" General Kale screamed for answers. His officers panicked. Systems refused commands. Nothing made sense. Then the screens in the control room began to play footage, not human propaganda, not threats, just truth recordings from the colony, where Max had died, seen from multiple angles, silent, slow, every Varnic soldier on screen clearly shown, the laughter, the blade, the fall of the human head, the quiet of the crowd, and then the face of the child who had watched it all, tears on her face, eyes wide and empty. Some of Kale's officers began to look away. Some looked down. A few simply left the room without orders, their minds shaking, their loyalty cracking. Kale shouted for weapons. He called for security. But there was no one left to fight. No alarms, no enemy. All doors unlocked one by one. And outside the walls of the base, crowds began to gather. Citizens, miners, refugees, even former prisoners. They stood in silence, holding signs with no slogans. Only images of Max, his face printed over, and then came the message from Earth. Not spoken, not written, simply uploaded into every mind across the planet through a neuroburst. Harmless but unforgettable, a memory, of feeling, the final thought of Max before his death. Peace. Not anger, courage, not hate, and a single phrase: "I die so others may rise." Kale ordered the destruction of the base. He screamed to fire the weapons, but the weapons were gone, the missiles missing, the fuel lines empty. Even the launch codes had been replaced with poetry, old Earth poetry in Varnic language, about war, about sorrow, about what it means to lose your soul. The general collapsed into his chair, shaking, and when he finally looked outside, his base was open, the walls unguarded, the people walking in without fear, not to riot, not to fight, but to help each other. They moved through the halls, gathering food, releasing prisoners, fixing broken machines. They acted as if the base was never a prison, but a broken home needing repair, and not one human was seen, not one gun fired, not one threat spoken. Only the work of Ghostfire agents already elsewhere across the Varnic Empire. Other bases began to report strange events, officers resigning in shame, soldiers refusing orders, civilians refusing fear. A storm of silence was spreading faster than any war ever could. In the halls of the Varnic Emperor, fury burned. He watched the fall of Draxus Prime on his screen, shouting about lies and tricks. But even his guards began to look at him differently. They had seen the footage too. They had felt the memory. They had children who asked questions. Now they had no answers. And then came the final blow. Earth released everything, not just the death of Max, but every secret the Varnic ever hid, the experiments, the tortures, the forced labor, the disappearances, thousands of documents, videos, testimonies from former allies, former prisoners, even from Varnic soldiers who had defected to Earth's protection, now speaking in front of alien cameras, showing the galaxy what the Empire really was. Rebellion started not from fire, but from whispers. Entire cities held silent marches, not for humans, but for truth. Statues of Varnic leaders were covered in white cloth as a sign of shame and remembrance. Back on Earth, Commander Reyna stood before a massive screen, showing the fall of Draxus and the rise of voices across alien worlds. She said to her team, "This is not victory, this is awakening." And it began with one man, one moment, one death, and high above the ruins of Draxus a new satellite was placed, one that would beam the truth forever. Its name was Max. Truth about Max before he was a symbol, before his face was painted on walls and whispered through broken radios, before his name became the word spoken by those who were once afraid. Max was just a man, a quiet man with a quiet job, who loved machines more than speeches and worked on colony outposts where no one paid attention to the stars. He fixed engines, built purifiers, taught kids how to make solar lights from scrap. He laughed easily, gave food without asking for thanks, and always smiled when someone asked him if he missed Earth, because he would say, "Earth is not a place, it is what you carry in your chest." But what no one knew was that Max had volunteered for the last measure long ago, when the program first began, when Earth realized that one day someone somewhere would push too far, and a message would need to be sent, a message not through weapons, but through sacrifice. Last measure was not just strategy, it was faith. It was the belief that a human life willingly given could spark a fire so powerful it would burn across galaxies without killing another soul. It required patience and pain and trust, and Max was the first to say yes. Trained in silence, learned languages, studied alien cultures, practiced stillness, not just of body, but of mind. He was told he might live for years in peace before anything happened. And he did. He spent 6 years on the colony, helping, loving, laughing, until the day came when the sky turned red and the Varnic ships arrived. When the soldiers pulled him from his station, he did not resist. When they beat him, he did not speak. When they tied his hands, he only looked at the children watching from windows. Knowing his part had come, knowing that every second he bought with silence was one more for Earth to prepare, were a signal device on his wrist so small no one ever noticed it, connected to a buried relay deep beneath the colony, linked to a dormant network across the stars, a system so hidden, so ancient, only the highest levels of Earth Command even remembered its name, Ghost Ferrand. In that final moment before death, Max pressed it once, no panic, no anger, just purpose. And then he looked at the sky, smiled, and let history begin. Oh, his story spread like wildfire through Varnic systems, through black markets and pirate networks, through rebel transmissions and diplomatic leaks. Not just the footage of his death, but his writings, his recordings, his journals filled with thoughts about peace, about what it meant to be human and why it mattered to stand. Even when no one was watching, his final letter, addressed to no one, was now read by millions. It said, "I am not brave, I am not strong. I am simply part of something bigger than myself, and if I must fall for that to live, then let me fall and let others rise." Children memorized his words. Prisoners painted his face on cell walls. Scholars wrote books about his strategy. Poets turned his silence into music. In one Varnic city, a choir sang his name in human language, while candles lit the streets, without permission, without fear. Even in the Varnic High Command, there were cracks. One young officer named Vena broke rank and stood before the council, showing her family the footage of Max. She said, "If this is the enemy, then we have become the monsters." And she left her post that day, walked into the streets, and joined the crowd outside, who now carried white flags marked only with the letter Mirth. Watched it all, not with pride but with heavy hearts, for they knew what it cost. They knew Max had been one of their best, not just in skill, but in soul. They held ceremonies not of drums or fire, but of silent 7 minutes. Across every Earth city, ships in orbit turned off lights, colonies paused engines. Satellites played the sound of Max's heartbeat, recorded during his final hours, calm, steady, unafraid. In his hometown, an old woman stood by the sea holding a small device. It played his voice, teaching a child how to build a kite. She listened and smiled, with tears in her eyes. She was his mother, and in the command halls of Earth, Reyna stood before the council and declared that Max would be remembered not as a soldier, not as a tool, not as a tactic, but as the spark that reminded the galaxy what it meant to have a silent still somewhere far away in the ruins of the colony. Where it all began, a small garden began to grow, watered by those who once watched him die. Now they planted flowers and placed a stone with no words, only the symbol of Earth, and one quiet message carved into the soil: gave, so we could become of Varnock collapseth. Varnic Empire once stood like a mountain, tall, cold, and unshaken. Its fleets ruled 10-star systems. Its voice silenced worlds with fear. Its leaders never questioned by their own people. But now that silence was broken, now that fear had turned into doubt, and the empire began to crack, not with explosions, not with battles, but with 1,000 quiet choices made by ordinary beings who no longer believed the Leon, the mining planet of Rethar. Soldiers laid down their weapons, not because they were defeated, but because they had seen the footage, because they had listened to the songs, because their children had come home crying, asking why the human had to die, and no one could answer. On the prison world of Argath, guards opened the gates and let out the ones who had been locked away for questioning orders, for speaking truth, for dreaming of something better. They handed them food and blankets and said, "Go tell the galaxy what you saw. Tell them everything." Given on the homeworld of the Varnic Emperor, his palace stood still. Guards lined the halls, but they no longer saluted. They only stared at the floor as voices echoed outside the walls, voices of people who once marched with flags of war, but now carried nothing but candles and memories. And above them all, the sky began to change, because Earth was not hiding anymore. The fleet that no one had ever seen now revealed itself. Round Varnic spaceships of black, silver, blue, drifting like stars, each one carrying not bombs, but light towers, broadcasting stories, images, truths, unfiltered, unstoppable. And the Empire could not stop them, because the truth had already taken root. Ghost fire agents walked openly in the cities. Now they wore no armor, no masks, only gray coats marked with a single letter M. And they carried no weapons, only devices that gave knowledge, that gave truth, that showed the people what their leaders had hidden, what Max had died to uncover. In the grand chamber of the Varnic Council, only half the seats were filled. The rest had fled or resigned or vanished into the crowd. Some whispered that the Emperor himself had not been seen in days. Some said he had gone mad, watching the memorials of Max spread across his cities, unable to understand how a single man could do what no army ever hadn't in those cities. Things began to shift. Statues were taken down, not by force, but by hands young and old working together. Murals of Max replaced them, not as a symbol of Earth, but of choice, of courage, of humanity. Not just the species, but the word itself, and Earthrana watched it all. From the bridge of the command ship she stood silent as the fleet moved, not to conquer but to stand witness. She gave only one order: send the message. And the message was simple: we are not here to rule, we are not here to destroy. We are here to offer peace, but that peace comes with truth, and the truth is this: Max died with no weapon in his hand, and yet you fear him more than any soldier. That should tell you everything. The message played in every Varnic system, every colony, every home, translated into every language, played once then stopped. There were no demands, no deadlines, only that single truth, and one by one, the world's Enswaradon, the ocean planet of Vesk, the governor stepped down and gave her office to a coalition of voices, chosen by the people. She said, let them speak. I have spoken to Longan, the desert moon of Kauran. Schools began teaching history, real history, not the Empire version, not the propaganda. They taught of Earth not as enemy, but as mirror. And in the city of Dareth, where Max had once repaired water systems, the people built a library out of scrap. They called it the Spark, and in its center stood a statue of a man holding no weapon, only a small tool in one hand and a book in the other. The Varnic Empire did not fall in fire. It did not fall in screams. It fell in silence and shame and awakening, but Earth did not celebrate. There were no parades, no banners, only a deep breath held for so long, now slowly released, and in that breath came a decision: we offer alliance. We offer aid, we offer memory, but we will not forget what started this, and you must not Ithorant. So the ships remained not as conquerors, but as keepers of the moment, as guardians of the truth that Max gave his life to reveal. And far from all of it, in a field on Earth, an old woman planted a tree. She did not speak as she worked, but when she finished, she looked up at the sky and whispered, thank you, my sonant. The stars above her seemed to glow just a little brighter. A new galactic law. There was a place where the war had started, a colony forgotten by most, surrounded by dust and broken stone, once ruled by fear, now covered in green and gold, where flowers grew from cracks, where silence no longer meant terror, but peace. And in the center of this place stood a monument, not grand, not tall, just a circle of white stones around a simple metal plate that held no name, only a shape, the shape of Earthlians. From across the stars came to visit, not to worship, but to remember. They walked in silence, touching the stones, sitting beneath the trees, reading the words left by others, words written in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing: never again. Children played there, not in fear, but in laughter. They asked who was the human who started this, and their parents told them he was not a king, not a warrior, not a god. He was just Max, and Max had given his life so they could live differently. Above that place, in orbit, a station floated quietly. It did not carry weapons or guards. It carried teachers, storytellers, historians, people whose only mission was to remind others of the cost of forgetting. And across the galaxy things began to change slowly, but with power. Treaties once ignored were honored now. Schools that once spread lies now shared truth. Leaders who once ruled with fear now listened or stepped down. And in their place came something new, not Earth, not Varnic, but something between, something shared, something. Oliviarth did not rule Earth, guided sometimes from a distance, sometimes through action, but never again with silence, and never again with ignorance. The Varnic Empire no longer existed, not as it was. Its systems now called themselves the Union of Free Stars, and in every meeting hall of that union there hung one image, the final image of Max standing calm beneath the red sky moments before his death. It was not a warning, it was a mirror in the home of Commander Reyna. Messages poured in every day from worlds that had once feared Earth, now asking for counsel, for help, for unity. She answered them not with pride, but with care, for she knew what they all knew now, that power without soul is poison, and soul without memory is dust. And Earth, a new holiday, was created not to celebrate, but to reflect. It was called the Day of the Spark, and on that day no machines worked, no screens turned on. People walked in silence, lit candles, read Max's words, sang his name, and told the story again and again to children and strangers and friends, not to glorify war, but to glorify choice. And still far out in the black of space beyond the known stars, a signal was heard by a lonely satellite. It was small, faint, almost forgotten, but it repeated a pattern, not random, not broken, a message, an old code from a distant world, unknown to maps, a cry for help. The satellite sent it home in black echo. The signal appeared on screen. Reyna stared at it, then turned to her team, her voice steady but soft. Prepare Ghostfire, she said. Send scouts, verify truth, and make no move until we understand. Throom nodded and began to work, silent, fast, calm. And Reyna stood alone for a moment, staring at the signal on the screen, a single pulse repeating again and again. She touched the panel beside her and opened a private message to the memorial satellite named Max. She whispered, looks like someone else forgot the law, Max. We will remind them because now the galaxy knew and would never forget you. Do not harm a human without understanding what we carry. You do not kill a human without knowing what you awaken, and you never ever underestimate what one human life can mean. Not ever again. The final law. The stars moved slow as if holding their breath, and in the quiet that followed the collapse of the Empire, something new began to rise. Not with fire, not with flags, but with footsteps slow and steady across soil once stained by fear. On the very ground where Max had fallen now grew a garden of voices, every species, every creed, all speaking the same truth. We are not who we were. The place they built was not a temple, not a shrine. It was a circle open to the sky, lined with stones, marked only by the hands that placed them. No names, no borders, just one shared shape in the center, the curve of Earth surrounded by stars. And beneath that shape, words carved by 1,000 tongues, all repeating the same vow: never forget. Never again, never alone. Ships from across the galaxy came to see it, not to bow, not to kneel, but to witness, for in those stones they saw their own shame, their own hope, their own chance to be better. And they spoke softly, they're telling stories of what they had lost, of who they had become, and what one human had given, so they could begin again. The image of Max became more than memory, it became a mirror. Some saw courage, some saw warning, some saw forgiveness. And in the cities once ruled by fear, murals rose tall and quiet, showing Max not in death but in life, laughing, building, teaching, smiling under broken skies, while others watched and learned, and Earth watched too. Not with pride, but with sorrow and promise. They did not claim the stars, they simply answered. When called, they did not plant their flag, they offered their hand, and slowly, gently, a new alliance formed, not ruled, not led, but shared. It was called the Accord of Sparks, and its first law was simple: the value of one life outweighs the fear of man. Urena stood on the bridge of her ship, orbiting above the colony where it all began. She looked down at the green and the stone and the light that now flowed through streets once soaked in silence. Beside her stood a child, one of the many who had once watched Max fall, now grown, now strong. The child asked did he know what would happen, and Reyna answered softly he knew what could happen, and that was enough. In that moment the stars shifted again, because far beyond the known charts, in the dark between systems, a signal woke, a quiet hum, a forgotten code, old but still true, a request for help, a cry from a world not yet touched by truth. And as the signal reached Earth, black echo lit up once more. The team moved without fear, without fury, only focus, only careened. Reyna watched the new signal and spoke to herself and to the stars, and maybe to Max too. We do not seek war, we do not bring fear. We carry memory, we carry fire, and we carry you. She turned to her team and gave the order, prepare Ghostfire again, but this time let them see us coming. Not to destroy, not to conquer, but to remind, to warn, to offer, because now the galaxy remembered and would always remember. Ryo, do not harm a human without knowing what rise you. Do not kill a human without knowing what you awaken. You do not silence a voice without hearing it echo through the stars. Sio, do not take from Earth without giving back something greater. And above all, you never again forget the power of one life lived with courage, one step taken without fear, one message sent across the stars. And the message was not vengeance, the message was not wrath, message was not dominance, message was this: remember, Rasu returned, end.